middle of the week, and that means we get to speak with Dr. Mitch. How you doing, Doctor? Oh, there, I have to hit the mute button. There we go. Dr. Mitch, are you there?
Having a great day.
Oh, something's really weird going on with my computer here. Anyway, glad to have you here on the show, and we always like to open up here, give people in the chat room a chance to get their questions ready up on the chat, and while they're readying their questions, Dr. Mitch will open up with what's new in cannabis science.
Well, I just wanted to say last week we had that question about menopause.
Yeah.
And I'm looking into that right now, and some of the related hormones have been studied in primates, but I can't find any actual publications on this, so we may be onto something for further research. All
right, so we can get the applications going here anytime soon?
I can only hope.
All right, anything new as far as any cannabis studies or polls that you've seen recently?
So in the published work right now, we have some kind of strange things, but I'm not at liberty to discuss this because I'm reviewing it. I apologize for, there's some interesting things that should be out next month. I'm sorry to tease everybody.
That's okay. That's okay. We're always looking forward to new research. I did a report in the news today that Reason.com had covered, polling on religious folks. It was a religious public policy poll, and they were finding that the young folks, Christians between 18 and 29, a majority of them now support legalization of marijuana. And amongst all demographics and all denominations, they didn't seem to have any scriptural or moral problems with the issues of marijuana. And I'm wondering if you've seen that in your research and how religion might impact our efforts to legalize marijuana.
Well, so Rabbi Elliot Dorff wrote a chapter on this in my book, Pot Politics, and clearly stated that the evidence is consistent with the idea of medical cannabis. So there are a number of, at least Old Testament scriptures that are consistent with the idea that we have to do everything we can to help the sick, and he walks through some of the pros and cons on that and the details, and seems to think that that would include, of course, making medical cannabis available. And then some other folks from various interfaith drug policy initiatives have suggested some of the same things. So I do feel like this is consistent with a lot of reads on that. My acquaintances who are in the Jehovah's Witnesses seem to see this as a question about harm, but they seem to misunderstand the literature on cannabis-induced harm. So they know that apparently the body is not theirs, it belongs to the deity, and they're only borrowing it, and so therefore they have to sort of take care of it while it's in their care. But these are folks who, see the harms induced by cannabis in ways that are inconsistent with the data.
Historically speaking, when we look at the influence of religion in our culture, I can think back to, the temperance movements, and they seem to have been born of a kind of a Christian evangelical, that second awakening that the country had in the 1800s toward Christian religion. And I'm just wondering, can you trace, is there a way of tracing where drug use became a moral issue to the early, religious, how that's evolved into becoming a kind of a religious or moral or cultural taboo? Like I say, I can picture it with alcohol and the temperance movement, but how quickly did religion begin to, fight against drug use?
This is curious because it's taken a number of tacks, and unfortunately it always ends up, at least in Judeo-Christian societies, with Noah's drunkenness. So we're talking literally, Old Testament tales here that go back, we're talking 7, 8, 9 generations from Adam. I mean, we're really not too far along here when we see some negative consequences related to the consumption of a substance, and then that kind of generalized from there. People claim to see this as consistent with other aspects of their religion, that support for family values and things along those lines. But again, I think it's often a misunderstanding of the cannabis literature to lump that in with, say, heroin addiction.
Do we have evidence? I mean, I've heard it in marijuana circles before of cannabis being used as a medicinal herb in biblical times. Do we have evidence of that or anything to back that up?
There are certainly some things that are consistent with cannabis being around in other areas, but not necessarily the areas of the Middle East where we think of when we think of where the Bible was written or where those tales are told. But not far from there in Africa, we certainly have some data on cannabis use. within, say, 300 AD or so. So that would be at least close and consistent with the idea. And then in the Asian countries, clearly medical cannabis use goes way before the birth of Christ or anything consistent with the idea of Christianity.
What of the claims of, specifically the anointing oil used by Hebrew priests? And there seems to be some question as to the translation of cannabosum or fragrant cane. What can you tell us about that?
Well, so it's curious, that cannabosum thing has been likened to cannabis in part because of the similar sounds in that first syllable. Hebrew scholars who I've talked to, both Christian and Jewish, suggest that this really just doesn't seem to fit well with other things they know about the era and the notion of cane at the time, too. So it's probably more likely, or at least equally likely, that this was just some kind of other stalk. But I'm hard-pressed to really point at evidence going either way. I certainly understand the idea that hemp seeds create a really nutritious and helpful oil. It just didn't seem to be discussed a whole lot in that same Middle Eastern area in that same era.
All right. Let's get to some questions from our chat room. Meddy Grove, Vermont would like to know, how long after the cessation of cannabis use would someone's glaucoma progress?
It's sad, but at least if Bob Randall's any typical case, we actually see within a few hours the pressures building inside the eye after basically the last inhalation of cannabis. So he actually had to use multiple times in the day and sometimes even first thing in the morning, simply because the duration of that cannabis effect was so brief that in part inspired the development of Cannasol, those cannabis-based eye drops that are available in the Caribbean and places like that, and some of the other eye drop approaches, although they don't work for everybody, seem to have an advantage in that their duration is longer, so you don't have to administer them as often.
Okay, Dreamweaver has a question. Are there any animals that do not have an endocannabinoid system?
Ooh. Certainly everything from the sea urchin up would have at least a CB1 set of receptors, and I'm not sure about the CB2s, but I'm happy to look into that.
So you really can get your iguana stoned?
Oh, it's sad but true. I don't know how disparate their behavior would be.
How can you tell?
And they respond to the anti-inflammatory effects as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is interesting. It kind of, dovetails into a story that I covered either yesterday or the day before about some vet doctors, veterinarian doctors, who want to do studies of using cannabis for dogs as they get into older age and dealing with, some have hip dysplasia and arthritis and pain, and being able to come up with some sort of veterinary version of cannabis medicine.
It makes perfect sense. O'Shaughnessy, back in the 1800s, actually did some of his initial tests on dogs, and we certainly share a lot in common as far as both the CB1 and CB2 systems are concerned. It seems like they could certainly benefit from both the analgesic effects and some of the anti-inflammatory effects that accompany some of these aging-related disorders.
Yeah, and anybody who's had to deal with a dog as it's getting older, you want to make sure their last few days, last few weeks are as pain-free as they possibly can. Before the vets have the chance to be able to study this and come up with the official, pay through the nose pill that you might get for your dog, are there any home remedy ways that people could give cannabis to their pets in a safe manner?
I'm not up on that literature for sure, but I do feel like the key would be keeping dosage incredibly small and really monitoring the impact very, very closely and over a long duration before you raised any of the dosage. Obviously, an inhaled vapor would have a more rapid impact and something that you could keep the dosage down on, whereas trying to get this orally ingested might run into problems and have a duration that's long and aversive.
I just have to make a note that in our chat room we have two, Meddy Grove brought up the glaucoma question, and we have Lively Libra as well. Both are glaucoma patients, and they said, "Oh no, we have to smoke all the time to get relief from our glaucoma. What a shame." Are you okay with that? All right. So between the glaucoma and the hot flashes, we'll have plenty of studies here that are generated from our chat room at 420 Radio. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I want to remind folks that if you didn't get a chance to get your question in here with Dr. Mitch, or you're watching on a replay, or maybe you just want to keep it private, you can always send an email directly to Dr. Mitch Earlywine at 420research@gmail.com. That's 420research@gmail.com, or you can visit our website at 420radio.org. Look for the contact link, and there'll be a drop-down choice for Ask Dr. Mitch. We'll collect your questions, and you can keep them anonymous if you like, keep them private if you like, or if you want to share with the rest of the community, if you're thinking of it, probably 6 or 7 other people are thinking of it as well. All right, before we go, I want to give Dr. Mitch a chance to give us the last word here as far as, we're moving into the weekend. We've got the Global Cannabis March taking place. Is there anything happening for you up there near Albany?
Well, as it turns out, this is our big chance to write to Governor Cuomo, because New York State Assembly will soon be voting on a medical marijuana bill here. And so I encourage anybody in New York State to write their state reps. And that's pretty much what's going to be going on between now and the next week or so. So I'd love to have folks chime in on that one.
All right, get involved, write to the state representatives. I'm sure at normal.org there is a Take Action Center there. They're going to have a link for whatever state you're in. Plug in your zip code. They'll take it. They'll make it very, very easy for you. And don't forget, Dr. Mitch Earlywine is a member of the Normal Board of Directors, and they're fighting here to make sure we're all educated and dedicated to get it regulated, legislated, and legalized. Dr. Mitch Earlywine, thanks for joining us here on the Russ Belville Show, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me, Russ.
All right, when we come back, we're going to have more of the reaction, worldwide reaction to the case of Lindsay Reinhardt, the multiple sclerosis patient in Idaho, whose children were taken away because, cannabis in the house, why, that's an imminent danger. Not a gun, not a case of whiskey, but cannabis. Be right back.
We'll be right back after